Hello beautiful people, and welcome to a mathematical look at the royal weapons and why they're fucking trash. Before we get into the numbers, I want to make one thing clear. The numbers on the royal weapons aren't completely terrible. The problem arises from the fact that they cost exactly the same amount of star glitter as the Blackcliff weapons, which are just strictly better. The royal weapons' first and most important weakness is the fact that their main stat is just not all that great. Now you might be thinking, wait, isn't attack percent good? Well, the answer to that is yes, but also no. Attack percent isn't a bad stat to get. Obviously, if you get it for free, you won't complain about it. But compared to other substat options, such as crit rate or crit damage, it's just not the ideal one. But why is attack percent not as good as crit rate or crit damage? The TLDR of it is that attack percent doesn't apply to all of your attack. It only applies to a certain portion of your attack, which is going to be your base attack. Since flat attack bonuses are calculated after the multiplicative percent attack, that makes percent attack less effective overall. When you look at the endgame stats you should be aiming for, you'll actually notice that you don't need too much attack percent. Since the timepiece doesn't have an amazing stat that it can have, you'll most likely be using an attack percent timepiece. On the other hand, you're going to need both crit rate and crit damage, and you can only get one of those through your headpiece. That means that it's generally going to be better to get crit rate and crit damage through your substats, either on your artifacts or your weapons. Okay, so that explains why the attack percent portion of the weapon isn't ideal. But what about the passive? The passive on a Refinement 1 royal weapon reads as follows. Upon damaging an opponent, increase crit rate by 8%. Max 5 stacks, a crit hit removes all stats. Now this is a little bit more complicated than it seems. Here's a little rundown of it. The best way to be able to determine how much crit rate you actually get from the weapon isn't to look at how much crit rate you have overall, it's simply to look at how many hits is it going to take on average for you to hit. If you had 0% crit rate, you would never crit, while if you had 100% crit rate, you would always crit on the first hit. If you had 50% crit rate, you'd have a 50% chance to crit on the first hit, then a 25% chance to crit on the second hit, a 12.5% chance to crit on the third hit, and etc. That means that if you have a crit rate that is very high, you're not going to get much out of the passive, while if you have a crit rate that is very low, you are going to get a lot out of the passive. But how much crit do you get when you have average crit rate? The reason you can't exactly analyze it in the same way as other weapons is because your crit rate is going to change over the period of a fight. In order to analyze this, we're not going to look at the average crit rate, we're going to look at how many hits it's going to take to score a critical hit. Now, I've represented the situation in a nice little flowchart right here. As you can see, it's actually not that complicated of a situation. First question you gotta ask yourself is, you're gonna score a hit. Now, did that hit crit? If it did, great, you go back to the beginning. If it didn't, well, you're simply going to score another hit. Now, you ask yourself the same question. However, provided you're using a royal weapon, the odds of getting that second crit are going to be increased. For example, if you had a 50% crit rate to begin with, your first hit will have 50% crit rate, but if, and only if, you didn't crit, your second hit is going to have 58%. Now all we have to do is repeat this process, and we can then look at the odds that every single amount of hits before a crit happen. You can then average it out and you'll obtain how many times it's going to take you to score a crit on average. Divide 1 by that value and you obtain your effective crit rate with your royal weapon. Now I took the liberty of calculating how much crit rate you actually gain depending on your current crit rate with the royal weapons. As you can see, at Refinement 1, you start getting less than 10% crit rate at around 25 to 30% initial crit rate, and you drop at 5 slightly above 50%. Late game builds usually aim to have between 60 and 80% crit chance, making the actual crit rate you gain from the royal weapons as low as 2 to 4%. 2 to 4% is quite literally the equivalent of one substat roll into crit rate. It's not bad, but it's definitely nothing impressive. On top of that, they have to be compared to the Blackcliff weapons, which have a crit damage substat. Hell, a Refine 1 Blackcliff weapon only needs 2 stacks to give you about as much attack as royal weapons such as the Royal Grimoire. Now, if you've already bought a royal weapon, don't panic. Royal weapons aren't completely terrible, they aren't useless. They're usually going to be better than the free-to-play alternatives. However, and I cannot stress this enough, they are not as strong as the Blackcliff weapons. So if you have not bought a weapon from the Starklighter shop yet, and you want to buy one, make sure that you buy a Blackcliff weapon and not a royal weapon. That's gonna be it for this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed or if you learned something, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and most importantly, tell me how your day was. If you have any questions or if you just want to support me, come follow me on Twitch. I stream almost every day. And if you want to ask me something while I'm not live, you can feel free to join the Discord. And as always, farewell, beautiful people.